All right. I guess all right. Hello, welcome everybody to this episode of the USL show. Sorry for the awkwardness. I'm having computer issues and I'm going to have to restart, but that's not important because right now we have a massive episode on the USL show where we thought to ourselves, how do we follow up what is usually our biggest episode in the year with the USL Crest tier list? And so we thought, why not just make the USL go to Division 1 and fight MLS head on? That seems like a good idea. So we are officially here to talk about just the USL moving up. We have the Athletic article that dropped. We had the USL coming out themselves and saying, oh, it's happening, baby. And then we just had a lot of just conversations. If you're someone who's playing the promotion relegation drinking game, please don't continue to play that game during this show because you're going to die. So there's a lot to go over here. And I just kind of want to just hop over or just kind of talk to John first off. How you doing, man? How are you?
Doing well. I've written too much today. I've agreed to do too many podcast appearances in the coming days, but this is big news. So I'm hyped to be talking to you guys about it.
Ryan, how are you?
You know, when I proposed the idea earlier this week for a USL mod in Civilization 7, I thought I would go more the diplomacy route and not the soccer wars route, but I'm ready to kind of fight in the trenches, if you will, for the soccer wars registered trademark.
Well, look, let's go ahead and just talk. So first things first, we had Paul Tenorio drop in the Athletic article of that this is planning to happen. And that the USL is planning to move to a Division 1 status, a brand new league into a Division 1 status. Now, they've already done this before with the USL Super League, right? The USL Super League went Division 1 status, and that has gone pretty decently so far, just one year in. So there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot of quotes that we got to get through. But I think let's get to just the pure, just what does it take, the infrastructure side, because that is the important part. Because if we're going to get to 27, 28, by the way, that's a European calendar if you are paying attention. What are the infrastructures? The PLS, Pro League Standards. If you were keeping up with the NASL lawsuit, you kind of know what they are. But there's a lot that go into them. But the two that are the most important, you have to be in a metro area of 1 million or more. Now, what they exactly constitute as a 1 million or a metro area, I don't know. For example, Greenville, South Carolina, according to quick Google search, are at 975,000. If they expand that metro just a little bit, it would easily be 1 million. So how strict are they with their metro sizes? That is to be seen. And the other one is it has to be enclosed in a 15K stadium, 15,000 seater stadium. Now, I do believe that has to be 15,000 seated seats, not standing room only, and it has to be enclosed. So if you decide to put wall of people and then the rest are just open fences, that does not count. Okay. It has to be enclosed 15K. So there's that. That is just the meat and potatoes. Now we in our own Google Doc kind of have this section of teams, current USL teams, both Championship and League One, that fit the 1 million requirement. And then we have another one with stadiums on where they fit and which teams kind of fit the standard already, who is ready to go now. This is not to say that there aren't going to be teams who can later fit, but we're talking if Division One started today. Definitely calling it the Premier League, by the way.
Yeah.
Who would be in? I want to let you guys talk about this while I reset my computer.
Yeah, and I think another or two crucial items to point out is with that 1 million person metropolitan requirement, that's only 75% of the league. So it doesn't necessarily need to be everyone. There could be some teams that don't exactly fit that quota. But the larger concern is that it has to stretch across 3 different time zones. So you have to find those teams that will be all in those time zones. I know USO 1 for the longest time had been like a primarily Southeast based kind of location, but finding those 3 time zones and the teams to fill a 12 team minimum, or by year 3, you got to get to 14 as well, is going to be a challenge from the get go.
Yeah. And I think for me, as I've thought about this and written about this today, it definitely is the stadium requirement that stands out. This is something where there are a handful of USL organizations that fit the bill in terms of the 15K minimum. But if you think about a club like Birmingham, if the USL is moving to a Division One model, they don't want to put 4,000 people in a 47,000 seat stadium on national TV. And I think that's an important consideration of the soccer specific venues that have been built around the league. Whether you think about Colorado Springs, Rhode Island, places like that, they're well under the 15,000 mark. Even somewhere like Lynn Family Stadium, if you take away the standing room, is only about 12,000 people. So it creates a real need for infrastructural investment around the league, or it requires US soccer to be a willing partner in what's going down here. We saw it in the past in the 2010s when the USL was moving up from the 3rd tier up to the 2nd tier, where the federation was willing to say, okay, we'll give you some time to get up to the D2 level, develop some of those stadia, get ready to bring to the table what you need to bring to the table. There's going to be a huge lift on the part of the federation if this is to be a thing, or we're going to need some reform to the Pro League standards. I think it opens up a lot of question marks really across the board, but it's a fascinating move.
And there are some teams who at least have plans to move to a stadium. You talk about Detroit, who has plans to get to a 13,000 seat stadium. New Mexico has obviously talked about in the past, same with Union Omaha, but all of those plans currently are set to be under a 15,000 seat mark. And that's just something to keep in mind to kind of consider when we're moving forward. Even some venues that people would say are like peak, like just how well they're built. Tampa Bay, high mark for Pittsburgh. Even North Carolina, which plays host to the NCAA men's and women's tournaments as well, is still only a 10,000 seat venue.
So a couple of things here. And I don't know if you guys directly talked about this when I was resetting it. So if I did, I'm just going to say it again. This is not the championship moving up. Now, some people were confused because the championship was originally USL Pro, which was D3, and those teams moved up to create the D2, that whole deal. This is not that. This is not suddenly every single team suddenly jumps up to the Division One Premier League, right? This is going to be teams are, now correct me if I'm wrong here, teams are going to have to apply through this. They are going to have to go through an application process just like before. So as of starting out, this is not, as we know it, planning to be an open system, which I know is going to get a lot of people in a tizzy, but that is the way that it is. This is going to be an application process, and you have to have proof that you are going to expand into 10K, or you're going to have, or you're already in a 10K stadium and you fit that 1 million. There are several teams that do not fit the 1 million number. Like there are several teams that just do not fit that number, and they're going to be left out. And that's tough. Now, as you mentioned, John, the professional standards could be changed in theory, but I mean, there was kind of a whole lawsuit about that, so I don't know.
No, I think it does raise the question of how strict does U.S. soccer want to be in a situation where, when these pro league standards came about, it was about stability. It was about creating a league infrastructure where something like MLS could exist, and then maybe in the future you could develop lower divisions below that. And I think it was a good guardrail against the NASL's kind of wanton ambition back when that was a problem. But I think the USL has shown that they're a responsible partner within the development of the American sport. They understand the value of the grassroots. They're not going to come in with something that's trying to destabilize really the lifeblood of the game across communities all over the map. And so you have to wonder, does US Soccer look at this and think, okay, now that we've got this organization that we trust, that we've worked with, can we bring them a little bit of leeway? Can we let them kind of extend into the 2030s with the waivers? It's an important question, certainly. And I think this is kind of the first problem I have with the proposal in terms of the details. I think the pro-rel element of it is thorny in and of itself, because even if the USL designs a first division that meets the standards, what if in the next season Lexington and Monterey get promoted and suddenly you're not compliant with the population numbers? What if, you can play that scenario out across 3 different tiers of competition. There are so many logistical questions that come along with this entire process.
And you even see it in places like Scotland or England, where some teams just can't get promoted to the next level just due to stadium requirements, or if they do get promoted, they would have to move to a different venue. And for a team like, say, Monterey Bay, if they get promoted and their stadium no longer becomes viable and their nearest viable ground is San Jose, that's really going to impact the club.
So just this comment from Ace the Kangaroo, which, by the way, if you're watching on the podcast player, check out the live stream sometime. We are going to try to answer these. But you can get a waiver for the 10K thing. You can also get a waiver to not play in a soccer-specific stadium, a la New York City FC, right? As long as you are essentially proving that you're working on it, they'll probably give it to you. Like, it's one of those situations of like, we're promised we're doing it. And they're like, show us the proof. And they're like, we swear. Maybe not, but like, as long as you are actively trying to move forward to that number. So if you have a stadium that is 10K and you're like, we can expand this to 15, we can do it. And these waivers exist everywhere. Like, I do believe that in order to get into the English Football League, you have to have like undersoil heating. Like, that's a part of it. Like, you have to have a certain size stadium. You have to have undersoil heating. You have to have all sorts of things to be compliant. You have to have a certain amount of safe standing. You have to have a certain amount, whatever. Like, you can make it work. There's a lot of leagues that do this. So professional standards are everywhere. It's not just a US soccer thing. It is everywhere. Can I, unless either John or Ryan, can I read out some of all the teams that fit the 1 million mark?
Sure.
Okay. Just to let people kind of know what the 1 million mark is, pay attention. The USL has already been going after a lot of these areas. So this is in alphabetical order. We have Birmingham, Detroit, Hartford, Indianapolis, Louisville, Miami, Cary, Raleigh are kind of the same place. Pittsburgh, Providence, Tampa Bay, Tulsa, Las Vegas, Oakland, Orange County, Phoenix, Sacramento, San Antonio. In League One, you have Charlotte, Greenville, Richmond, Omaha, Westchester. And teams who are planning to come in and fit in that number is Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Jacksonville, Dallas, Oklahoma City, and Buffalo. Those are the teams that fit the 1 million mark. Now, there's a couple of edgy areas like Loudoun. Loudoun County has 500,000, but do they lump in DC and do they lump in like Baltimore?
Segra is located in the DC metro, so Loudoun counts. You also look at Greenville. They are short by 25,000, but if you lump in Spartanburg, they're easily in. How they choose to combine, we'll see. But that's one of those situations where the USL has gone after a lot of these areas that already fit the bill. And it's even less of a going after the markets and more like, if your city is big enough to support professional sports, it's probably got 1 million people already. Like, the USL probably didn't need to have a strategy to say, okay, these markets have that amount of people. I think the 75% metric in terms of the million population mark kind of makes this a non-issue for compliance. Like, it's going to take a whole lot of havoc when pro rel comes to shove to kind of miss that key performance indicator that the league needs to be hitting. But yeah, overall, it does raise the question of, like, I mean, someone like Charleston, that's been one of the class organizations in the USL, really kind of the oldest continuous team that's going at the highest level, a team that on the sporting side obviously fits the bill, but they don't fit the stadium requirements and they don't fit the metro requirements. What do you do in a situation like that? I think everybody, all of us especially, would love to see the Charleston Battery playing First Division soccer. This is a club that deserves to be playing First Division soccer. Depending on what US soccer does with the waivers, depending on all of these things, there's a chance that doesn't happen. And I think that's something that the USL needs to come to terms with.
As for stadiums, there's already a few stadiums that already fit inside this area. So in the USL Championship, you have Oakland, you have Birmingham, you have the Miami FC, you have Louisville City, you have Richmond, you have Greenville. They currently fit. Now, this does not include teams that are planning to build, right? Detroit City seems like they're almost certainly going to be able to do it, but their stadium's only going to have 13, so it doesn't fit that standard, quote unquote. Rhode Island FC, it is expandable. They are also building. We're talking about teams that currently fit it. Now,
but even Oakland is like temporary in the Coliseum. Like, to include them, that's tenuous.
But also yes, but their stadium that they're also planning that they announced is 15K. And I think can expand up
No,
to
they're doing the
25K.
modular thing in the parking lot. That's going to be 15 before the permanent 25. But like, I think if you look at the list of USL championship clubs that are in a proper venue, Oakland, kind of, sort of, Birmingham, I covered up top. Like, there are some real issues with playing in protective and the optics of that for a D1 league. The less said about Miami, the better. So like, you kind of get into this thorny territory of the adherence really just isn't there.
So I guess there's a couple of quotes that I found very interesting. And now, if you have not read the Athletic article, you should. There are extra quotes in there that were not posted in the original or in the USL press release. But there's a couple of things in here that I just kind of want to point out. And I'm going to try to find it. Sometimes it's a little bit hard for me to find where it is, but there's been some interesting quotes. Now, if you look in the USL article that was posted, there is one quote that kind of stuck out to me, and it is this: around the world, top tier clubs thrive in cities of all sizes, and we believe the same as possible here. The demand and infrastructure are in place, and the potential for growth is immense. That is outright saying, like, that this does fit more than just the 1 million mark. I can't, reading between lines here, like, it feels like they're saying, like, a smaller city can move up. And I wonder if this is an attempt to try to change these standards.
It certainly could be. And I mean, we've covered some of the territory already relative to the possibility of standards reform. To me, that feels like the USL kind of getting out ahead of the possibility of pro rel, and kind of the idea we talked about of, what if a team like Greenville, who plays in a stadium, albeit not a self-owned stadium, but one that fits the requirements, what if they were to move up because they're successful on the pitch? Why should we not let that happen? Like, I don't think that the USL is going to come out guns a-blazing on day one and say, cool beans, Monterey's got a 6,000 seater and a 400K metro, we're putting them in D1. So the quote to me kind of speaks to the longer horizon of what the USL is trying to do. But it's fascinating that already at this stage, day one of this being an official league initiative, Paul McDonough is already coming out and saying, listen, we want clubs of all shapes and sizes to be trying to push through. I think that's a real statement of intent from the league.
And I was doing some research on the side. I was looking at all the MSAs for just North America and to find what in the, I guess you could call it the quote unquote big four leagues of what the smallest MSA is. And it was New Orleans at 58. That's like slightly ahead of what Knoxville is. And New Orleans just hosted a Super Bowl for reference. So it's proof that there are various different markets within North America that could very well host a team and thrive at a top level. New Orleans has two top four leagues teams in their city.
Now, I'm going to just go ahead, unless there's anything you guys want to hop back to, that is fine. But I want to go ahead and get to the McDonough quotes that is going to get everybody in the tizzy, and that's why you are all here. The people in the chat, you are here for this quote and this quote only. We've been very public about trying to get there with ProRel. We're not there yet, but we will continue to push forward with it. This was after the statement of this is going to more flesh out the pyramid, especially in the USL. I mean, it's here. It's the conversation. It's the interesting part. Now, there is a world where this could be, I think, is it Liga Meki that does the 2-tier or 2-type promotion where you have to fill like a certain financial requirement and be have a certain amount of success? Or am I completely making that up? It's somebody.
They've done something like that. It's kind of, they've changed it quite a bit, so I'm not positive, but at one point, yes.
So,
and I think with also with Liga MX in the past, they used to do to kind of prevent against relegation. Like if a team got promoted, they had, I think, minimum 2 or 3 seasons that they could spend in the top flight. And then it was like a combination of their points per game at that time to determine if they could stay up or go back down.
Question we get in the chat. In the article on the USL website, they said U.S. soccer has been very supportive. Does this mean Don Garber would be in these conversations? And is he able to push back on the USL becoming D1? MLS does get a certain amount of board members on the USSF board, and Don Garber is like the head of the MLS like board essentially. So yes, he would have been at least aware of the conversations, and if he wasn't there, he would have been like, he would have had a proxy or some sort. But yes, he would have been there for these conversations. And in theory, yes, he would be able to push back on this and vote no or something like that. But I would be intrigued to see what happens here, because the NWSL and the USL Super League have been fairly friendly to each other. And I'm not saying MLS would be friendly, but MLS and USL have a somewhat decent relationship when you think about how the two teams were let into the USL. And it was used as a very good thing by MLS. Like MLS were allowed to sit in a higher league to push their players forward. And then it was only later after the USL was like, hey, your kids are just not competitive enough for our league, where they kind of split their ways. But in all reality, they've had a good relationship, as good of a relationship as you can have anyway.
Yeah, and I believe that the MLS voting share on the U.S. Soccer Board is only about like 15%. So certainly not a power of veto or anything, even if he's in the room. And frankly, like, if we're going to be that honest, USL isn't going to be taking MLS's lunch money at the end of the day. The US, or rather, MLS has a 30-year head start on being Division I soccer. They've had the Beckham era, the Messi era. They've been more visible. And when a generic fan who kind of knows about soccer but kind of doesn't, certainly not the kind of person who's in a USL show live chat, is thinking about pro soccer in this country, they think about MLS. It's hard to get over the stigma of being minor league, no matter what the sanctioning says. So, I mean, maybe MLS, just out of sheer spite, would say no. Maybe I'm just overly optimistic thinking they wouldn't do so. But yeah, you never know.
And if you also look at it from the MLS angle, is if you just compare the ownership groups of the two, of like you have your New York cities that has the combination of the City Football Group and the Yankees, down to other people who may not spend as much, such as your San Jose's. they still collectively would basically be able to outmuscle USL if they were like really determined and wanted to. And I think if it's just more so if MLS really wanted to have a will to kind of muscle their way through against USL, they very well could.
I just think that there is a lot of interesting conversations that we could have here. And I think one that is going to be fascinating, and it's kind of what you jumped at, John. I'm trying to think of how I want to word this. I think that the move to D1 is important, but we're also going to see, I think, with Lexington and other teams that self-promoted in North Carolina. When you look at North Carolina, when you look at soon to be Lexington, how are they going to grow? How are their fan bases going to grow? Because they got promoted from D3 to D2. Are we going to see a jump in attendance for Lexington? We did not with North Carolina. I don't think D1 means anything to anybody except for us sickos talking on a Thursday night about how this is an emergency podcast about the USL going D1. It only matters to us. In all reality, like you mentioned, John, MLS does have the name brand. It's just the truth. Now, whether the drink pro rel thing happens, maybe that brings something to it. Maybe that is what gets fans to actually care, because right now, I don't know. I will say, and I want to add on to this before I move on, or before I throw it back over to John or Ryan. I also think that the addition of the Premier League will actually get more teams to say yes to Pro Rel, because at the time you would just be relegating into D3 and you'd only be promoting into D2. Now, if you're a championship club, if you have any kind of ambition about yourself, you're like, we could get promoted for sure. We can for sure get promoted. So, as opposed to, God, what if we get relegated?
I think the thing that stood out for me was the timing mentioned in the article. So you had the date of 2028, and we ought to get into the implications of what that phrasing means in a little bit here. But notably, entering 2028 will be the first season after the USL's current television contract is up. They've got the CBS and ESPN partnerships that are ending after 2027. Read the tea leaves. The USL is starting a Division I league in time to negotiate a new TV deal. You got to think that either they have an assurance from potential broadcast partners, or they're hoping that they'll see a revenue increase, because D1 doesn't really mean anything unless the clubs start acting like they're D1. If they continue to operate with the level of marketing, the level of player acquisitions that we've seen in the USL Championship level, that's fine. The league will continue to grow, but it won't really kind of embody what the goal of this entire initiative ought to be. Like, it feels like sort of an empty title, a regulatory label from US Soccer, if there isn't action and investment on the part of the clubs to live up to that. And so by putting it after the 2026 World Cup, when you're hoping to see the boost in fandom, timing it to be able to get a better television deal and get more eyeballs on the league, it feels like a very intentional strategy for the way that they're trying to pitch the league going forward.
And you're also looking at it as a way to tell the future teams that are joining the leagues, like, hey, this is now a target that you could kind of aspire to, who by the time you would want to join for 2028, like you look at USL Pro for Buffalo, for Dallas, for Palm Beach, these other kind of ambitious clubs who want to join into USL. And it's like, hey, we're going to have the Premier Division starting up at this season. Let's start getting everything shipshape, and then let's kind of raise the bar, raise your game, if you will, to into joining the league in time.
I just think that in general, this is a lot of ambition. And John, you're spot on with the broadcast part of this, where how much of this was like, obviously this has been talked about for years. There's been rumblings of D1 for a long time now. But how much easier do you think it was to have this conversation after the USL outdrew MLS on its final, where MLS, according to cable numbers, did not draw as well as the USL. And it was a team, by the way, Colorado Springs, that has less than 1 million people in it. That is a city with less than 1 million people. That does not even fit the PLS, PSL, whatever standards, right? It is a team that doesn't fit, and they outdrew MLS, where I think that almost maybe made USL a little bit more bullish because they can also take that to a broadcasting partner, say, hey, you put us here, check it. Hey, CBS, you remember how we outdrew MLS? Well, guess what? We're about to be the same level of MLS. Don't you want to stay on board with that? And I think that it makes USL's negotiating power so much stronger if they can, especially if they can continue that trend.
Yeah, and you've kind of got to think about it in terms of the rising tide of the sport in general. Like in a vacuum, does the American soccer fan watch the product on the field in Major League Soccer and then watch the championship final like you saw with Colorado Springs and actually like register a difference in the style of play? Maybe if they're an astute soccer watcher, that's possible. But I think if you look at it agnostic of the branding and agnostic of the storyline, it's a similar product. So if you're CBS, who can kind of get in on the ground floor and become a real growth partner for the league, that matters a lot. And that's something that the USL can build on going forward as this initiative gets realer and realer.
And you're also going to look at it from MLS's perspective of if they are going to be closed after San Diego FC, after this 30th team, you're going to have a lot of markets who are missing the MLS boat, quote unquote. I mean, we'll see if MLS chooses to try and expand into USL markets, Indianapolis, Las Vegas, as they've mentioned in the past. But you have a lot of really good markets within USL that can be strong anchors for the league to really kind of just bolster her eyeballs within the sport. Louisville, Sacramento as other examples.
I mean, I think Sacramento is a fascinating conversation of itself because they were the team that was passed up continuously. Indy, another fascinating example as of recently. But Sacramento, again, they are the ones that was just like, got you $1, that whole thing, where they just kind of reel away the MLS thing. If we are looking at expansion fees, can someone please tell me for sure the last expansion fee? Because I think it was $300 million for MLS. I think it was the $300 million mark. If you're looking at USL Championship, I think it was what? Was
30.
it 25 million? 30?
San Diego FC was 500 million.
Okay. Yeah. So you're looking at a tenth of the cost, if not less. And if you go to Premier, like if you go to this Premier League and it goes even higher, was say 70 million, you're still going into the same level fractions on the dollar, where I think if you're an investor, it makes more sense because you're not having to spend as much money and possibly could be getting a better deal in terms of TV money. You have your you can get higher ad revenue because you are going to be able to sell to your advertisers. We are going to be on CBS. We are going to be on ESPN. We are going to be on et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? We go on right after the marquee football game, right after the marquee Premier League match, whatever. I think that you can sell to an investor. You will spend less money to make the same amount of money.
Well, it's kind of an interesting differentiation within the market, right? Where if you look at MLS teams in terms of value, 26 out of the 30 per the Forbes report were worth $500 million or more, and the growth was about 20% since 2018. I'm misremembering the numbers, but it's a significant growing league, and you pretty much are making your investment back if you buy into a team and just hold it for 5 years. The USL isn't going to be drawing billionaires in the same way, but I think there's an opening for people who don't have FU money, people who aren't oil barons, but people who kind of have a connection to a city. Like I think when San Diego FC came to town and displaced the Loyal, there was some real criticism over the fact that this felt a little bit astroturfed. The people who were involved didn't really care. So there's something almost attractive about the fact that the USL fills this little middle niche of the market, and it's still going to be drawing wealthy people. there's still a very robust vetting process for the people that the USL wants to be involved on the ownership side. But I don't know, it feels a little bit more open. And I think it very much represents the ethos of what this league is trying to do and hopefully what it's trying to maintain, even as the aspirations get a little bit higher.
Ryan, before I jump to you, one thing you mentioned, John, the community ties.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to look at how many times the word deep community ties or community was mentioned in the USL press release. The amount of times they said deep community ties on a reason why they're doing this, I think you might be spot on. And I think that's more of a call to investors than it is for family.
If
Anyway,
you search community, it's 9 times in the press release. So that is an astute observation from you there.
Ryan?
What I was really interested in is if you look internationally, you have something like the J League, who was formed around the same time MLS did in the 90s, so 30 years ago. But they took a different approach where as they expanded, they had an upper limit of number of teams they wanted in their premier division before they started a second division, and then eventually started a third division and had expansion clubs just join in at the bottom of the pyramid. So this may be getting into the weeds here for this question, but for a USL Premier Division, do you think USO is going to set an upper limit? Like, do you think they're going to say only 20 teams are going to be in this division? Everyone else you join in at the USL Championship level or USL League One? And to give a second part to this question, say you are a New Orleans who comes into the league and says, I want to join USL, but here's $250 million, put us in the Premier Division. Do you let that happen, or do you still kind of encourage that pro rel discussion? That's like, okay, we're going to let you in, but you're coming in at League One and you work your way up.
I mean, I want to say, Ryan, in a way, we've already seen this. I want you to look at Santa Barbara. They were supposed to be League One, and they held out until until Memphis decided to bite the dust. Like, they kind of already did that. I think you're seeing a lot of teams trying to just jump into League One and kind of hold out until they can jump up. Union Omaha said in their stadium announcement that they are planning to go to the championship. I mean, it's kind of implied with Greenville recently. I think that you are already seeing that of sorts of like, hey, do the lower investment at first, see how you like it, see how it feels, and then you can make a jump up if you want. Now, if I'm being honest, and I talked about this before, I think if the USL wants to make itself even more appealing, I think you need to make the League One entrance fee lower. I think it's starting to creep up a little bit too high for my liking, especially as it is tier 3 and national. Like if you want to expand the third tier, I think it needs to be more regionalized. I think it needs to be lower entrance fee. And then if you want to sell the pro rel dream, say, hey, man, you spent $1 million to join Division 3. You got promoted. Welcome to the Prem. And I think that's an easier way to go. As for the can you just buy your way in? I think at first, yeah, I think you will be able to. There's not enough teams to right now that truly fit that 12 to 14 member very beginning without someone coming in. So I think at first, yes.
It's an interesting question when you look at the markets that the USL has announced for this next wave of expansion. And shameless plug, I kind of covered this in the Backfield piece I wrote today, kind of looking at the cities that USL could consider. So few of them meet the standard. So the idea of we're going to let them buy in, you feel like it ought to be contingent on fully meeting D1 no matter what. To me, there are kind of 2 candidates that fit out in that vein. Well, 3, I guess. Jacksonville, who very publicly said, we're building for 15,000. That was not by a mistake, folks. Like, they're gunning for D1, and you feel like they could do it from day one. I think Dallas, although I don't believe they've announced a potential capacity, they're playing in a huge market. They're playing in, albeit in a suburb in Garland, but they have stadium plans that really matter. And ditto for Oklahoma City, who, again, haven't announced a potential capacity, but they're gunning for a 2027 opening. They've got very wealthy new investment. They've got the celebrity side with Russell Westbrook. You could see those 3 markets going in from D1 from the jump. I think everyone else might be kind of starting at the lower rung and working up, but there's the potential for growth. And I think if somebody comes into the USL with that like Godfather offer you can't refuse, they're not going to say no.
I think that when we really get into the nitty-gritty, which we are already in there right now. I think where we kind of need to look is indeed after 27, 28. I think one thing that's huge here is that there are a lot of USL teams that are planning to be the host cities or the training host, or sorry, the host for the training facilities for the World Cup. Something else mentioned, I believe it was in the Athletic, maybe it was in the USL post. I can't remember which one, but the Olympics is a big deal. And I think the Olympics being a big deal is a big deal because think about the youth movements that the USL has been on. They have been very proud of their youth movement. Look at how many teams and look at how many kids that we put into these US youth national team setups. Look at how many kids that we put into these setups who plays in the Olympics. It's U23s. This is a league that is planning to have itself in 2027. We have two kids right now that are in the U.S. Youth National Team, U17s. They'll be right at the age to be in those U23s come 2028, which is when they are planning to kind of start this thing. They can start off right away with we have kids who are playing in the Olympics that were not only playing here now, but grew up in this league. And I think that's a big, big deal.
And Kaylor, I found your the 26 potential or at least team sites that they would use for the World Cup next season, or sorry, next year. And like San Antonio was mentioned, Chattanooga was mentioned, Louisville City was mentioned by name as being a host location for the World Cup.
Birmingham is also, I think, in conversations. Last I heard, that's kind of boots on ground thing. But as far as I understand, Birmingham is also in the running. Same with Indy if they can get that sorted.
Which is always a big question, but yeah. Kind of a pivot point. I mentioned the 2027-2028 thing, kind of putting a pin in it earlier. It could just mean they are starting in one of those 2 years. It could mean, as has been hinted before, that the USL is really looking hard at the move to a European calendar. I think we kind of saw the hint of what it might look like with the Super League this season, where you've got half the slate in that kind of August to end of November-ish window, and then you're kicking back off in mid-February. Where are you guys at on that? Like, do you think it's something that moves the needle going forward?
I don't think it moves the needle personally, but I do think that it might actually help out fix a lot of the issues that we see personally, as Kevin in our live chat is just not having a good time. And here's why I think it may not be.
Well, by the way, if you think about the people who are saying no, it is all Northeasterners, and there is a reason for that. Yeah.
But I also would say, look at Major League Baseball. They send their northern teams down south during the cold months, and then they send the stupid hot cities, like if you look at your like Atlanta's, your St. Louis's, et cetera, they go up north a lot during the summer. And some people would say, well, that's not fair. But I think that if you start the season like the USL Super League has in February, send those most northern teams down south just a little bit. And if you end the season before it turns 110 degrees in Phoenix, before it's 100 plus 95% humidity in Miami, Tampa Bay, Birmingham, I think that you're going to cut out the heat stroke fear, and also you're able to move those northern cities into playing in more dealable climates at the beginning of the season.
And Canyon mentions it in chat. I think this is very much a decision that's going to be rooted on if MLS is considering moving their calendar to a European calendar as well. You really want to have kind of a united a calendar within U.S. soccer, or not even to get to how League Two would be impacted if everyone went to a European calendar, if they would still be a primarily summer league for college. But beside the point, like if you are trying to operate as a league, it would make sense that all the men's leagues in the same country would operate on the same calendar. So trying to move to this sort of format to match MLS, if they do indeed make the switch, would just make logical and logistical sense.
I'm fascinated by the kind of alignment with the European transfer window component of it. Like, that's something that's been a little bit weird if you think about young players moving over. And I think given that the USL is so focused on kind of getting there as a selling league, developing those young players like we were talking about a little bit and trying to move them on, or even kind of becoming the finishing school for your Nick Marcanic types, the players who are a little bit further along but need that pro playing time. If you're anchoring with Europe, if you're aligning with the way that they do transactions, I think that's only a good thing for the stated goals of the USL. So I think the weather thing kind of goes both ways. Like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't with the hot and the cold extremes. But there are some upsides, even if it would be a big change.
I think one thing with the transfer market, I think it would allow players to have more freedom. And you mentioned that. And I am so blanking on his name. Freaking Orange County just got sold earlier, like 2 years ago.
Kobe Henry, Corretti Oshandina.
No, Winger.
A lot of them.
Golden Boot. Alosky.
Oh, Alosky. Yeah.
Alosky, thank you.
Yeah.
Alosky mentioned outright he didn't want to move in the middle of the summer transfer window because he wanted to stay in Orange County to help win a championship. Marcanic kind of said the same thing. I want to stick it out here to help my boys. If the USL aligned with Europe, they wouldn't have to make that choice. They could finish the season and move on. I think it makes it easier for a player because they don't want to just show up for half a year, move on, and feel like they let their teammates down. And it also still allows the club to get their payday. I think it makes even more sense in terms of club side and the moves itself for the player.
And even break it away from a selling perspective, from a buying or signing players perspective. If you're trying to attract a player from Europe, you could say, hey, I know your league season just ended, but you'd be joining us halfway through the year. Or the alternative is, hey, I know you're in the middle of a league season. Do you want to join to get us before our preseason? If our schedules align with them, you then at least cast a wider net of players who could potentially make the move to USL, to MLS, to joining one of the leagues here.
One thing, by the way, with the Super League, before we kind of get back to John, one thing I love from the Super League season, and I mentioned this, I think, on this last episode of the USL show. If you didn't know, there was like a part of the episode before the tier list, so go check that out. The one thing I loved about the Super League is that there were teams, DC Power, who fired their coach before the break, and they went and made sleeping changes. And I think that's something that could be really interesting on the USL sides and almost might make these teams even more bullish to make changes, especially if there's pro rel, because they're going to get like a 2-month-long break where you could have a new coach with these players, and they get 2 months to work with this coach without it affecting their season at all. They have time to save their season. And if a new coach comes in and you've already had 2 months to get their system, and then you go out and play after the break, then that's even better. I think that if you add in the pro rel part, I think that there is even more chance for ownership to be bullish, to put in the chips, especially if they're trying to get promoted, or more importantly, if they're trying not to get relegated. But even if that doesn't come into play, it just lets ownership and front offices have more opportunities to make the hard decisions.
Relegation survival specialist Sam Allardyce coming in to save Las Vegas from the drop.
Kind of question, or it was kind of put on the screen. Have you ever played a sport in the heat versus the cold? I'm all for cooler weather, but it's about the players. Where I will just say, like, extreme colds and extreme hots, yes, it does matter, but like also there's frostbite, there's also heat strokes. I don't know, like you do get the break, but I don't know, like you're still having to play, especially with a lot of these teams. Look at your Pittsburghs, look at your Detroits, look at your Birmingham, Sacramento, where they're on turf. It's not just 110, it's 130 plus, right? Like that is just as dangerous as your, oh, it's 10 degrees.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's 110 degrees out, you could have a heat stroke. If it's 10 degrees, you kind of just need a cup of hot cocoa after the game and you're going to be all right. Like there really is a distinction on the health basis.
It does always, at least with the cold weather, made me think of, I think it was the last qualifying cycle for the U.S. They played that game against El Salvador, I want to say, at St. Paul for Minnesota. And like there were like frozen T-shirts in the crowd. It was that cold, but those definitely seem more like instances of few and far between. And there are mitigating ways for the league to kind of stop that.
Plus, snow soccer, orange ball, nothing better. Think about that.
More orange ball, good.
That's the official policy of this podcast.
Mountains good, orange ball good. That is, we are simple folk. Do you know how bummed out I was that it didn't snow in Colorado Springs for the final? I was so rooting for an orange ball final.
Didn't they have to clear it out a bit? Do I remember that right?
It did snow, but
the wrong day.
It was not enough.
And we did have a question from Ace the Kangaroo here. Do we think that USL D1 champ gets a CONCACAF Champions Cup spot?
I think so.
Do they kind of have to? I would say so.
Because it's the top division in the country, top domestic league. It's the reason there was a question a long time ago in the chat of why does the Canadian Prem get it? Because they are the top flight in Canada. There are teams that are in another league that's in the top flight of another league, but it's almost like Wrexham or something like that because they play in Wales, or I guess Swansea City. They play in Wales, oh my gosh, they play in Wales, but they play in England, where they play in Canada, they play in the U.S., but the top flight.
They're based in Canada, but they play in the U.S.
Thank you. I could not find that to save my life. But they are the top flight in Canada. So if the USL is top flight, then they kind of have to. They don't have a choice, I don't think.
Let me turn that question on its head, though. If they are getting allocated a CONCACAF Champions Cup spot, does that mean MLS is losing one of their spots, or are you losing the Open Cup spot that would be provided? Does the format of the Champions Cup completely change? And if MLS is losing one of their spots, is that just another feather in the cap for MLS to say, no, we don't want to give up our D1, our sole member of D1 status?
This is how the cup dies. This is how the cup dies. Not with a bang, but with USL going D1.
See, I thought you were going to a thunderous applause direction, like your Padme Amidala in the Senate, but nevertheless.
I mean, yeah, Jägermeister to be the real.
That would actually rule, I will say.
So, any other final questions? I don't think we've seen a lot of just kind of stuff into the chat, a lot of speculation stuff. I mean, just a lot of things that would be fun. But at this point, we are just purely speculating, just having a good time. So what are, I guess, just kind of parting thoughts before we go on this emergency pod?
I think the thing with a lot of these big swings we've seen from the USL in the past, you don't know everything from day one. There's a lot of work happening behind the scenes. A lot of the questions that I've posed probably have very solid answers that we just don't know about yet. But I think it's our job as some of the few people that cover this league to kind of take a fair perspective. So I'm just excited to see where all of this goes.
Yeah, and as the soccer wars kind of commence again, I also would like to at least point out for social media that you're not going to solve the world in 280 characters or less. Sometimes it's worth just step away from a discussion that if it gets way too heated or or either side that it's very acceptable to just set the phone down and just kind of move away from it, and things will work themselves out kind of as just the weeks and months go along.
I will tweet through it and I will not stop. I promise you that. Um, that's great. I think, by the way, I do want to end on this because it came from Harry Austin. First off, I just wanted to, Mikey, do you think it's along for the work for this, eventually work for the sports, mean that MLS and USL work together on a tier to cover the country? I honestly, there have been comments already of this is just a ploy for the USL to be bought out, ABA, NBA style. But we've also been saying that for like 2 decades now. So there's
be
that.
wary of any rumors about you or MLS buying anything out. That's often unfounded.
Yes. I want to end on this before we end up like just kind of hanging this up. And I'm going to take what Harry Austin said of the odds that this actually happens, and I'm going to change it a little bit. Sorry, Harry. Where they said in their press release they are planning to announce the first few teams in the next few months. They have a plan in place already. I think that this is a lot more solid than the pro rel. The pro rel is happening. We are going to vote on having a discussion on pro rel, right? This is much more concrete. So here's my actual question for that I'm going to take from Harry that I'm changing. And I'm going to start with you, John. What percentage do you think that they actually start 27, 28?
80. I think that a D1 league with no promotion and relegation is pretty solidly going to start then.
Ryan?
I would echo and say 80% for a D1 league. I think the only thing that would really kind of throw a wrench into things would be if MLS were to, over the course of between now and 2028, announce expansion markets for teams that have, or for cities that have USL teams, and how that may complicate things, especially if those cities are clubs applying to this premier division. So as it stands, 80%, but subject to change.
I am going to go with 50% purely because the Super League had to delay by 1 year just from unforeseen stuff. So if that kind of happens again, I could see them delaying by a year, but they're also giving themselves a little bit more leeway. But I'm going to say 50, but I do appreciate that you guys are as bullish as you are. Any kind of final thoughts? This is still an episode of the USL show, of course. So final thoughts.
Getting Zelalem to New Mexico was like a wow move. Not because he's especially good at this point, but because he's kind of like the first player I was aware of, oh, this is like a dual or tri-national who has a ton of hype, and he's in the Arsenal system and everyone wants to get him. And then he kind of just turned into nothing. So it's weird to see him like at New Mexico United.
Fair. Ryan?
I guess not USL related, but I watched the movie A Real Pain yesterday night, and I thought it was very good.
Oh, I actually watched the movie yesterday. I don't know if you guys have seen Spencer. It's about Diana, Princess Diana.
Yeah, the Pablo Larraín movie. Yeah, that's a
yeah.
good one. Yeah.
I was, first off, did you know that the person that wrote all the music was the guitarist from Radiohead?
He is a terrific film composer. He did a Paul Thomas Anderson movie called Phantom Thread that's like one of my favorite scores.
I did not know that.
So good.
I did not. It's crazy. I think that like it was one of those movies. I wasn't sure what to make of it because I had never really seen a movie like that where it's like a historical fiction, but also kind of not like historical fiction thriller. I had never seen a historical fiction be put into a thriller, and it was stressing me out. I don't really like thriller movies, but it was very good. Also, Kristen Stewart, so good, so good.
That director kind of does a lot of like great women movies. So he did Jackie, about Jackie Kennedy with Natalie Portman, and then Maria, about Maria Callas, just came out with Angelina Jolie on Netflix last year. So they're I mean, mileage may vary. If you're into it, you're into it, but they're always pretty decent for my taste.
Well, that is that. I actually watched the movie. How about that? Hey, thank you to all the people who jumped in. We really appreciate it. Our next 3 weeks, we are going to be doing our preview shows, and we are not putting the USL Championship together. We are doing Western Conference, Eastern Conference, League One. Maybe not exactly in that order, but we are separating them. That way we can deep dive into every team and we can get into it. That's going to be starting this is going to be every Tuesday at our normal time, assuming no emergency pods come up. We're going to have Kit Season, who's going to be dropping in tomorrow. It's going to be a blast. Just look at all the things, enjoy all the content. We appreciate you all. And for the first and final time tonight, here's Alan's voice.
Thank you for watching another episode of the USL Show.
The USL Show is now proudly part of the Protagonist podcast family. Please go to protagonistsoccer.com to check out more work. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see everyone again next time.